The night of the driver's visit was one I'd replay in my mind countless times. It was supposed to be another evening in solitude. Alex was abroad for a month on a business trip. With no children to fill the empty rooms and no friends I could truly confide in, I stayed busy with my boutique. That night, when his driver knocked on the door unexpectedly, that was when it started. Before we dive deeper into this story of love and betrayal, take a moment to support our channel. Ensure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, where we bring you compelling, real-life stories like this every single day. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. Now, let's dive into today's story. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to Alexander Williams, one of the wealthiest men in the city, I would have laughed at the absurdity of it. Alex was the epitome of success. A polished, charismatic man with a rare blend of charm and intelligence that drew people to him. He had a way of entering a room that made everyone take notice, and when he looked at me, I felt as though I were the only person who mattered. We met at a charity gala, a place I'd been invited to by sheer luck. I remembered the glittering lights, the soft hum of violins, the gentle murmur of wealthy couples clinking glasses, and the sudden silence when he'd walked in. He'd been surrounded by business partners, laughing and shaking hands, but his eyes kept drifting over to me. I was captivated. There was something magnetic about him, the way he commanded respect with a mere glance. By the end of that night, I found myself in the backseat of his car, my heart pounding as he leaned close and whispered that he wanted to see me again. That night, I felt like Cinderella, plucked from my ordinary life and thrust into a world of luxury. Our courtship was a whirlwind, a series of candlelit dinners, private jet rides, and weekends in Paris. It felt surreal. In just 5 months, we were married, my last name now adorned with the power of his. But it was only after our wedding that I began to notice the cracks beneath the surface. Alex was constantly traveling, always answering calls and checking emails, even during our most intimate moments. In the beginning, I tried to be understanding. After all, he was a successful businessman. His life didn't revolve around me, but I couldn't ignore how distant he seemed. The man who had swept me off my feet, who had made me feel cherished and adored, was now barely present. Our nights together became fewer and further between, often ending abruptly with him claiming exhaustion. As days turned into months, the emptiness grew. We had our mansion, our staff, and the glamorous lifestyle most people would dream of, but I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and the house felt emptier than usual. Alex had been gone for weeks, his absence leaving a hollow stillness that seeped into every corner of the room. The once vibrant home felt heavy and stagnant, as though holding its breath until he returned. To pass the time, I busied myself with my boutique, filling my days with tasks and customers, hoping to distract myself from the aching void. But that day, the boutique had closed early, and the silence settled back over me like a weighted blanket. I lay on the living room sofa with a book in my hands, though I could hardly concentrate on the words. My mind wandered, tracing the familiar curves of the room's furniture and decor, wondering how long it would feel like this, like a waiting room for a life that had paused. My thoughts drifted in slow circles until the sudden sound of the doorbell jolted me out of my reverie. Startled, I put the book aside and hurried to the door. When I opened it, there was Eric, my husband's driver, standing on the front porch. He was dressed down, wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt instead of his usual crisp uniform, and it made him look younger, almost unrecognizable. I hadn't expected him, and for a moment, I just stared, unsure of what to say. "Mrs. Williams," he greeted, his voice polite, but carrying an unexpected warmth. He looked at me with a shy, almost hesitant smile, his eyes lowered as if he didn't want to intrude. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I shook my head, recovering from my surprise. "Eric, no, you're not disturbing me at all. I paused, glancing around as though looking for a reason for his visit. "Is there something you need?" "I just thought." He hesitated, as if considering whether to go on, then gave a small, self-conscious shrug. "I thought I'd check on you. It must be quiet here with Mr. Williams away for so long." There was something in his tone, an underlying concern that was somehow comforting. It struck a chord deep within me, reminding me just how much I'd been craving genuine conversation. Even a few words exchanged with someone who understood, who saw me, felt like a relief. It was the sort of interaction I hadn't had in so long, the kind that Alex's long absences had stripped from my daily life. "Oh," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "Thank you, Eric. That's thoughtful of you. Why don't you come in?" He stepped inside, a little cautiously, as if unsure whether he should cross that boundary. I led him to the living room, motioning for him to sit on the sofa. We settled across from each other, and the initial awkwardness faded quickly as we began to talk. Our conversation started light, the kind of small talk you'd expect with someone you didn't know too well. He told me he had a family back in the countryside, a young son and a wife he rarely saw due to the demands of his job. As he spoke, I caught glimpses of his life, the silent sacrifices he'd made. It was strange. I'd only ever seen him as the silent man in the front seat, the one who shuttled Alex and me to events, his face unreadable, his presence almost invisible. Yet here, in my living room, he felt like someone else entirely, a friend perhaps. As we talked, I poured a glass of wine, and then another. I noticed he looked at the glass with surprise when I offered him one, as though he wasn't accustomed to sharing such moments. But he accepted, and we continued talking, our voices warming with each sip. There was laughter too, rich, genuine laughter that I hadn't felt in ages. The house, which had been so stifling and silent, seemed to fill with a new kind of energy, a vibrancy that had been absent for too long. But amid the warmth and laughter, there was an unexpected pause, a lull that filled the room with something heavier, almost palpable. I glanced up to find him looking at me, his eyes softer and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. His gaze lingered as though he were seeing beyond the surface, beyond the carefully constructed life I presented to the world. "Are you happy, Mrs. Williams?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with a genuine, almost painful curiosity. The question cut through me, dispelling the laughter like a gust of wind. I blinked, caught off guard, my thoughts unraveling in my mind. Happy. The word felt foreign, distant. I had spent so long convincing myself that everything was fine, that I had all the things one was supposed to want. Yet in that moment, with Eric's gaze fixed on mine, the illusion began to crack. I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him. He was close, closer than I had realized, his hand resting on the sofa between us. There was a moment of hesitation, a pause as we both became acutely aware of the space, or lack thereof, between us. I felt a surge of emotions rise within me, a mixture of confusion, desire, and a strange kind of freedom. Perhaps it was the wine, or maybe it was the loneliness, finally spilling over, but suddenly all my carefully constructed walls felt fragile. Before I knew it, I was leaning forward, almost against my will, as though drawn by an invisible force. My fingers brushed against his hand, and he didn't pull away. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, yet open, as if waiting. I could feel my heart pounding, my breathing shallow, and in that suspended moment, the world around us faded into nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand to my cheek, his touch gentle yet steady, a silent question lingering in his gaze. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin, the soft brush of his thumb against my face, and something inside me surrendered. We moved closer, our faces mere inches apart, and the tension that had built between us broke. In the dim light of the living room, We kissed, softly at first, uncertain, as though testing the boundary we were crossing. But the tentative touches soon gave way to a deeper connection, one fueled by the loneliness and longing we both carried. The intensity grew, our restraint slipping away as we tangled together on the sofa, letting ourselves be swept up in the need that had lingered unspoken. Hours later, the room was silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence, a softer, more intimate quiet that held the echoes of shared vulnerability. We lay there, side by side, the weight of what had happened settling over us like a fragile veil. It had been unexpected, unplanned, a moment born out of shared loneliness. The following morning, I woke up with a feeling that clung to me like a shadow, a sinking dread that was hard to shake off. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind with an alarming clarity. Every detail, his touch, the warmth of his breath, the lingering taste of wine on my lips was sharp, etched into my memory. It felt almost surreal, but the lingering sensation of his presence beside me was unmistakable. I'd given in, knowing that my husband was miles away, oblivious to the choices I'd made in his absence. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. That was the part that gnawed at me the most. It wasn't just an act. It was a release, a surrender to the desire that had simmered for too long. I'd convinced myself I could compartmentalize, that I could draw a line between the roles I played, the dutiful wife and the woman who'd found solace in someone else's arms. But in the quiet moments after, as dawn crept through the curtains, reality hit hard. I wasn't sure if I felt guilt or exhilaration, or maybe a twisted mixture of both. Days passed, and I told myself it had been a one-time thing. But that thought unraveled the more I replayed our encounter, and each time I recalled his touch, my resolve weakened. The rational part of me screamed to let it go, to return to my normal life. But desire had its own logic, and it was relentless. A week later, I found myself making excuses to linger in the places I knew he would be. Somehow, one excuse led to another, and we were alone again, our eyes meeting across the small space, the air thick with unspoken words. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. The way we moved toward each other was almost choreographed, as if we'd been waiting for this moment all along. And this time, the touch was even more electric, our desire no longer held back by hesitation or guilt. Every stolen glance, every breath, every kiss felt amplified by the knowledge of our own recklessness. The days flew by, and I returned to my routine, hiding what I had done behind a mask of normalcy. But it wasn't long before Alex returned from his business trip, bringing with him the familiar comfort of my life before. Suddenly, the night spent with Eric felt like a distant, feverish dream. I forced myself to settle back into my role as a wife, as if nothing had changed. I told myself that what I'd done was behind me, that I could put it away like a chapter in a book I had no intention of reopening. The next time Eric came over, I tried to keep our conversation brief, but he could sense the tension. Before I could second guess myself, I told him, voice shaking, that we had to stop, that it had been a mistake. He didn't react the way I expected. He didn't argue or press. Instead, he just looked at me with a quiet understanding, nodding as if he had already anticipated this moment. His face was unreadable as he left, and as the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. I thought it was over. I tried to push the memories aside, to bury them somewhere deep within me, and for a brief moment, I convinced myself I could move forward, that I could look at Alex without feeling the weight of my choices crushing me. But then, that illusion shattered. Later that evening, as I sat on the couch, my phone buzzed with a new message. I barely gave it a thought, expecting it to be something mundane. But when I opened it, my heart plummeted. A view, once video message. My curiosity got the better of me, and with a trembling hand, I clicked on it. The screen lit up and the video began to play. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. There we were. Eric and I, captured in intimate detail, every moment exposed, every whisper and touch laid bare. My mind went numb, my chest tight as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. How could this have happened? How could he have recorded us without my knowledge? Before I could process the shock, another message appeared beneath the video. If you want this video gone, you'll do as I say. The words blurred before my eyes as my heart hammered against my ribs. Blackmail. The realization hit me like a punch, leaving me reeling. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a trap, and I'd fallen right into it. The days that followed were a nightmare. Eric's messages became relentless, each one a fresh demand, each one holding the threat of exposure over my head. At first, he asked for small amounts, and I, desperate to end this ordeal, complied. I siphoned money from my boutique, pretending it was for expenses, trying to keep it from Alex. But Eric's greed grew insatiable. The demands became larger, more frequent. Each time I sent money, he'd follow up with another message, a reminder that he still held the video, that he could ruin my life with a single click. It became harder to focus at the boutique. My employees noticed my distracted glances, my hurried phone calls. I would tell them I was just dealing with family matters, but even I knew the excuse was wearing thin. Every time I heard my phone ping, my heart would stop and a cold sweat would break out on my skin. The messages came at all hours, each one more demanding, each one a reminder that I was trapped. But what terrified me the most was the video itself. I couldn't bear to watch it again, yet the memory haunted me relentlessly. I knew every detail by heart now. The way the camera had caught my face, my expressions. Eric's voice echoing through the silent house, his mocking tone as he reminded me that he held all the power. Alex returned from his latest business trip a few days later. I tried to mask the exhaustion, the worry that clung to me like a second skin. But he noticed. "Are you all right?" he asked one evening, his brows furrowing with concern. "You seem..." "Just a bit tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "The boutique's been busy." He accepted my answer, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. It was only a matter of time before he started asking more questions, and that realization terrified me. I couldn't let him find out. I wanted to tell him to come clean, but I feared the consequences. I feared losing him, losing everything. But the harder I tried to keep up the charade, the more it began to crumble. Every time he mentioned finances or asked about the boutique, I would stumble, my voice wavering just enough for him to notice. And every night, as he drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay awake, waiting for the next message from Eric, the next demand, the next threat. One evening, Alex and I were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping wine, when he asked again about the boutique's finances. I could see the concern in his eyes, the worry that was starting to creep in. "The boutique's not doing as well as you said it was, is it?" he asked, his voice steady but with a trace of doubt. I froze. I could feel the walls closing in. I couldn't lie anymore, not to Alex, not to myself. "It's just been a little difficult," I said, my voice shaking. I was careful not to look him directly in the eyes, hoping he wouldn't notice how badly I was lying. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was softer now, and I could hear the hurt in it. I swallowed hard. "I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it." He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether or not I was being truthful. Finally, he sighed, standing up and walking over to the window, his back to me. "You're not alone in this, you know," he said quietly. "If there's something you're struggling with, we can fix it together. But you have to be honest with me." That was when I knew. I knew I had to tell him. I couldn't keep hiding this anymore. If I didn't confess, the truth would destroy everything. The words burned in my throat as I fought to say them. But when I finally spoke, I did so in a whisper, barely able to meet his eyes. "Alex, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Eric, your driver." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "What about him?" I hesitated, the fear gripping me, choking me. I cheated on you with him," I finally said, my voice barely audible. It was just once, but I didn't know how to stop it, how to fix it. And now, he'd been blackmailing me. He knows things about the boutique, about our finances, and he's been demanding money to keep quiet. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Alex stood there, motionless, as if trying to process the weight of my confession. The look on his face was one of disbelief, his eyes widening in shock. He took a step back, his hands trembling at his sides. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've been paying him. You've been hiding this from me all this time?" I nodded, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. "I was scared, Alex. I thought I could fix it, that I could make it go away. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I just gave him what he wanted, he'd leave me alone." Alex's eyes darkened, his face hardening. "And now? What happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I tried to end it, but every time I do, he threatens to tell you everything. I'm afraid that if I don't keep paying him, he'll ruin everything. He'll destroy us." "God," Alex muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You've been living with this for months, and you never said anything." "I didn't know how," I whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to see me this way." He walked past me, his movements sharp and angry, and I could hear him muttering under his breath, "I don't even know who you are anymore." I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of my actions. Every part of me wanted to reach out to him, to beg for forgiveness, but I knew that I had shattered something that couldn't be easily repaired. The next morning, Alex stood in the doorway, his fists clenched at his sides, staring at Eric as he sat behind the wheel of the car, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had transpired between them hung thick in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the betrayal that had taken root. "Eric," Alex's voice was low but sharp, each word measured. "We need to talk about your deeds." Eric shifted uneasily in his seat, avoiding Alex's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." Alex stepped forward, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "Don't play dumb. I know everything." Eric's expression faltered, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, as if searching for an escape. "I know all of it," Alex cut him off, his voice rising now. "The affair, the blackmail. I know how you've been threatening my wife for months." Eric's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, unwilling to admit anything outright. The tension between them was thick, and Alex could see the unease creeping into Eric's usually unflappable exterior. "You've crossed a line," Alex continued, his voice cold. "Not just as a driver, not just as someone I trusted, but as a man. You think you can hold something over her head and get away with it. That you can destroy my marriage, destroy us, because you think you have some kind of power. You've taken advantage of her vulnerability, and I'm not going to sit by and let you blackmail her like this." There was a long pause before Alex's expression softened just a fraction, his tone shifting as he spoke more quietly. "You need to understand something, Eric. Even though she betrayed me, that doesn't give you the right to treat her like this. You crossed a line, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Eric's eyes darted around again, a nervous edge creeping into his voice. "Forgive me, sir." Alex stood taller now, the weight of his decision firm in his mind. "I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done. I'm going to report you to the authorities." Eric's face twisted with disbelief. "You can't." "Oh, I can," Alex interrupted. I'm calling my friend, Officer Daniels. You're going to be facing charges for blackmail, Eric. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. No one will trust you." The words hit Eric like a slap in the face. His defenses crumbled as his bravado slipped away. "You don't need to do this. You don't understand. I had no choice. She led me on." Alex stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "She didn't lead you on, Eric. She made a mistake. But you chose to exploit it, to twist it into something you could use to control her. You're a coward, using her fear to get what you wanted, and now you're going to pay for it." Eric stared at Alex, his eyes wide with panic. "Please, Alex, don't do this. I'll stop. I'll leave her alone. I'll go away." But Alex had already pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over the contact for Officer Daniels. "It's too late for that, Eric." With one final pleading look, Eric opened the car door and stepped out. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "You won't do it," he muttered, more to himself than to Alex. "You can't." But Alex didn't hesitate. He hit the call button, his gaze never leaving Eric's defeated form. "I'm doing this, Eric. You've already made your choices. Now, you'll face the consequences." Hours later, Alex sat in the living room, his mind racing with everything that had transpired. He couldn't believe how quickly everything had unraveled, how much trust had been shattered in such a short time. His fingers drummed nervously on the armrest of the couch as he waited for Officer Daniels to call back. He had done the right thing, but the weight of his decision was still heavy on his chest. He had to protect his wife. He had to protect what was left of their marriage, even if it meant facing the harsh reality of what she had done. He couldn't forgive her yet, not fully anyway, but he knew he had to make sure Eric paid for the way he'd manipulated the situation. That much, at least, was clear. His phone buzzed, and he quickly grabbed it, his heart racing as he saw the name on the screen. "Alex, it's Daniels," the voice on the other end of the line said. "I got the information you sent over. We'll take care of it. Eric's not going to get away with this." A wave of relief washed over Alex, but it was short-lived. The real battle was still ahead. He had a long road to walk, both with his wife and with his own sense of betrayal. But for the first time in months, he felt like he had some control. He could no longer allow Eric to hold any power over them. "I appreciate it," Alex said quietly, his voice steady now. "Just make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." "I'll make sure of it," Daniels replied. "We've got a strong case. Eric's not going anywhere." As Alex hung up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He had taken the first step. He had put Eric in his place, but the road ahead, what came next with his wife? What came next with his wife? Still uncertain. In the days following his confrontation with Eric, Alex found himself grappling with an overwhelming sense of loss. The betrayal still stung, but the anger he had once felt was slowly giving way to a deeper, more painful sadness. The realization of what had happened between him and his wife hit him in waves, but so did the love he still had for her. Despite everything, he couldn't just erase the memories they'd built together, the love they'd once shared. One evening, as the soft hum of the evening settled over their home, Alex found himself standing outside their bedroom door. He couldn't deny that a part of him wanted to hold on, to believe that things could be fixed. But it would take more than just forgiving her. It would take a commitment from both of them, one he wasn't sure she was ready for. He knocked gently before opening the door. His wife, still visibly shaken from the past few days, looked up from her spot on the bed. Her eyes were red, a mixture of guilt and fear, clouding her expression. The atmosphere between them was charged, the silence deafening as they both took in the presence of the other. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to get so out of hand." Alex stood there for a moment, staring at her, taking in her words, processing everything that had happened. He could still see the woman he had married, the woman he had loved, but also the woman who had hurt him deeply. He knew forgiveness wouldn't be immediate, but he was determined to try. He walked over and sat beside her on the bed. "I know you're sorry," he said quietly, his voice rough. "And I can't pretend that it doesn't hurt. But I need you to understand that what you did, it wasn't just about me. It was about trust. And when that trust is broken, it doesn't just shatter once. It keeps cracking piece by piece." She nodded, her eyes lowering to her lap, her hands twisting in her lap as if trying to find some way to explain herself. But the words, the excuses, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how they could move forward.
If you found this story gripping, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more intense and eye-opening stories just like this one. And remember, your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.